This episode of Cult House is brought to you by Indie Comics Creator Con. Featuring over 150 comic book creators, 15 publishers, and 10 panels, Indie Comics Creator Con takes place Saturday, March 15th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven, Connecticut. Among the guests announced so far are Heather Antos, Jim Lawson, and Mike Martz. Tickets are $8 regular or $5 if you're a student or military attendee. To get yours, visit the referral link in this episode's description or go to www.indiecomicscreatorcon.com/ref/culthouse.
The sky's not blue.
Welcome back to the Cult House Podcast. Today's episode is produced in collaboration with Monkeys Fighting Robots. I am your host, the Scholar of Spite and the Saturday Night Delight, Roger Riddell. Joining me today, he is a comic book writer best known for his work on titles like Deadpool, X-Men, Iron Man, and Infinity Wars, and he currently has titles including Dead Eyes, Falling in Love on the Path to Hell, and the upcoming West Coast Avengers, as well as a photo book titled Timing and Luck. He is Gerry Duggan. How you doing today? Actually, I just mispronounced your name. Gerry Duggan.
Yeah, it's Jerry. How you doing?
Pretty good. I always get
Good.
that name mixed up uh, with both you and Jerry Conway. I know, like, for some reason, my brain just always wants to pronounce a hard G.
Well, we're both Jerrys. I mean, I do have a Gary though on the team on Falling in Love on the Path to Hell. So, I'll answer to anything though. But the hard G does throw people. Um, yeah, thanks for having me. Sorry I was running late, stuck in LA traffic. But yeah, it's uh, former X-Men writer, current West Coast Avengers writer, current image writer, and photographer. It's been a busy year, but
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to be here.
Yeah, no, I mean, just right off the bat, before we get into all of the projects that you're working on, one thing that I just want to say off the top is with your Deadpool run a few years ago, um, that came out like during, I guess, like a decade or so that I was living in DC. And there were like a
Yeah.
few moments in that that really just kind of like resonated and encapsulated how living in DC made me feel. Which
Oh, that's funny.
there's the one panel where he's sitting in that apartment and it's just got the balloons, "Welcome to Washington, DC," and he's just sitting there like alone. And
Yeah.
then the other one was the sequence where it's prior to him being in DC, but he's just walking around trying to figure out where he fits in. And he's just like, here isn't it, and here isn't it, and here isn't it. And I'm just like, oh, in retrospect, that's my DC experience in a nutshell.
Yeah, DC is a it's an interesting city. It was not for me ever really, but I knew a lot of folks that called it home and loved it. I found it to be a little confusing in terms of the layout, but I also, it's such an odd city. There's so many students. There's obviously so many politicians. It's it feels like that Green Lantern mosaic world a little bit, and it was um, difficult for me to navigate for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Excuse me.
found the navigation of just like the layout of the city was just always weird to me. And then the um I guess the prevailing attitudes of the city, for lack of a better way to describe it.
No, that's a good way to put it. I totally get it.
Yeah. Uh, so yeah, you've got West Coast Avengers coming up, and I guess to some extent, builds off of um the X-Men run that you wrapped up, which I know I said this on Twitter, but like the way that you and the rest of that X-Men team tied up all those loose ends together at the end was phenomenal. Like there was I feel
Thanks,
like
bud.
you all stuck the landing on something that would have seemed like really difficult to land all those plot points.
Well, I appreciate it. We things changed and shifted several times over the course of the run, but I was always very comfortable because we had Jordan D. White and Lauren Amaro as our everyday editors, and then we had a lot of other group editors, and obviously I was really comfortable with Al Ewing and Kieran and everyone else that was writing and drawing those books. So it was a good situation to be creative in. And, Jonathan left and made every attempt and did everything he could to make sure that everyone that followed him would have success, including me. So, we knew our end pretty concretely and were able to kind of write backwards a little bit. And we also didn't, even though I think we broke hearts, we didn't rob anyone of all hope. And we got to write the words the end, which I've been very privileged in comics to write. Not everyone ever gets to write those words and have it have it be meaningful, have it be impactful. So again, a real privilege to be able to do, and I'm glad it landed for you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's also one of those properties where the fans can sometimes be difficult to please. But I know a lot of people that I also, feel like they agree that the ending was satisfying.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I think, again, forgive me, like at a certain point during all of this, for various reasons, many of us kind of logged out. I understand it was, and I certainly like, I was at New York Comic Con. I can, I'm guessing I've signed most X-Men 700 copies now. And so to hear from people that they enjoyed the end and that this was their X-Men, it's really thrilling. I also got to be the first fan of Krakoa and the first fan of House of X, listening to Jonathan's pitch for what he and RB would do in those two minis, and yeah, that was so much fun to be able to just play. I've never played in a band, but I have to assume that's what it's like in a big band where ideas are bouncing around and one thing leads to another and somebody else picks up something and goes for it in a way that maybe you wouldn't have or that you're excited that they did. So yeah, really, really grateful, a special group of folks. And depending on how you count it, it's somewhere between 700 and 900 comic books, which is an achievement in and of itself, I think.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's an impressive like depth to that entire era of X-Men. And I feel like there was something for pretty much anyone who is an X-Men fan. Like I didn't read every single series, but I feel like the things that I wanted were delivered in the series that I did read.
That's great. That was the hope, is that you could dip in and out and get what you needed and get what you wanted, or be surprised and pick up something that you might not have picked up. And, obviously, we're trying to set as big a table as possible for everyone. We want folks to stick around, but nothing was mandatory. I hope. I don't think. Certainly wasn't executed to be like that.
Yeah. And so that era was also the second time that I've ever been a regular reader of Iron Man. The other time being during Dan Slott's Tony Stark Iron Man run.
I'm
Um,
in good company.
yeah. I know I love Dan. He's always been really nice
Dan's
to me
great.
when I've talked to him at cons. But uh with West Coast Avengers, with Tony and Rhodey, putting together this team, how much of that is building out of what you did during your run on Iron Man, and then also with Firestar being part of that team? Um, how much of what happened with her during the fall of X plays into what you've got planned?
Um, yeah, a pretty fair amount for her. Rhodey came out of his situation with a real big idea that, hey, why shouldn't we try to drain the swamp of some of the villain, uh, the villains that we have where we're going? Why are we? It seems like there's a revolving door on prison in the Marvel universe, and Rhodey's big idea is going, can't we sort of show some of these folks who are a little off path that there's a better way? And whether you would consider it a prison abolitionist story or not, I don't really intend it to be that. I just think, from the elevator pitch, it's more sort of the work release Avengers, or the Dirty Dozen Avengers, where you're going, here's some folks that aren't ordinarily counted on to save the day, aren't asked to save the day, are tasked with that, and how does that sort of alter what they're doing? Obviously, Ultron is a big part of it, and Firestar does have a big role to play. She is coming out of a difficult situation where she was very quickly inserted undercover into what amounts to really depending on how hard you want to go, you'd certainly call them a terrorist organization, but also maybe a machine of genocide would also be a fair way to call Orcus. And not everyone necessarily believes, right, that she was not there of her own free will, or there because she wanted to be, or that it's a fun place to pick up a character who has been pretty squeaky clean for a long time, and to sort of put some dirt on her. So West Coast Avengers is a really interesting book. I'm aware that I need to counter program a little bit because there is a book that does not have any descriptors or adjectives in front of it, that would be considered the main Avengers book. And I'm just trying to write this as though it's the only Avengers book. I'm having a lot of fun. Iron Man's in the Silver Centurion armor, which is one of my favorite armors, and we have a very complicated, like, big secret that kind of will emerge out in the first issue, and we'll see how that will complicate this book moving forward.
Yeah, and with Ultron being part of the team, is that sort of the first step toward that, work release Avengers idea?
Well, there's a character called Blue Bolt on the team, and we'll see that some of the other characters that we have, some other villains that have sort of cycled in and out before we even pick up the book. So there's a little bit of a backstory. We were taking a moderate time jump forward where some complicated things have happened. But Blue Bolt is a really fun character who has the power of flight. He can manipulate electricity, and he is not happy to be a prisoner. He's not happy to be a Avenger. He's generally not happy, and he's very happy to tell you that he's not happy. So it's a fun set of circumstances to have a team book.
Yeah, and out of any villain that you could consider redeemable, which one do you think would have sort of the most fun path to that?
Of any of them, or the ones on the team?
Or of any of them? Like if you could choose anyone in the sandbox to play with, like who do you think would have the most fun path to redemption?
Uh, the Spider-Man, I think, has the best rogues in all of comics, so it's a reach for them. But that becomes a little complicated because they're always in motion over in the Spider Office. But those are the ones that I think are really fun. And I don't know how you can do this job and not believe in redemption. I think that you have to. You have to think that that's a possibility. Otherwise, I'm not 100% sure what we're always writing about.
Yeah. Oh no, I agree on that 100%. I mean, I think there are some characters that have a more difficult path to that sort of thing. Like, I don't think the Red Skull is like easily redeemed or like
No, no, I
Kokju or
agree.
yeah.
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 Yeah, Ultron's going to be a hard one.
Yeah. I was rereading some 90s comics the other day, and that version of Ultron was there's so many versions of him that it's just always kind of fun to see how he's evolved over the years because I guess he's sometimes a different Ultron altogether.
Yeah, some of these characters are like tofu that pick up the flavor of the writers and the artists that are drawing them. We're always trying to be mindful of continuity, but continuity is really what sticks and not necessarily what prints.
When you're coming off of um, a big sort of overarching story like the X-Men and you're picking back up a creator-owned, more self-contained story like Dead Eyes, th how does that feel just from like a creative standpoint?
It's like an old pair of shoes. It's very comfortable, you know. John and I would have kept drawing and writing Dead Eyes for a long time, but a lot of life got in the way. We knew where this story was going. Obviously, we tee it up at the end of the first arc, and then we jump right in. It's been a very short amount of time between the end of the first mini and the beginning of the second mini, even though several years have passed. Um, in a perfect world, this book has 4 and 5 and 6 volumes right now, but some things, are not meant to be. We would love to be able to do more. I think this is our best Dead Eyes. And it really is just like slipping into a very comfortable skin that you used to walk around in. He was a crook in the story, but he was never the biggest crook in the story. And I think that's what sets him apart. He is a Robin Hood figure, but he's kind of a stingy Robin Hood. He'll sort of get his and then sort of make sure that everyone's all right. And then he's always got a bag that he's trying to collect so that that'll be the thing that will let him be free of all of this. And there is a certain subset of crime genre that is Boston crime, and it's kind of the um, it's kind of the most upsetting crime. Like I'm thinking like Friends of Eddie Coyle and those sorts of really dark old crime stories where things don't always have a happy ending. And so, this is a book that we're very proud of. We just sent the third issue to press, so that'll be out shortly. We think we're going to probably take a month between 3 and 4 to accommodate an illness, and then we'll be right back with 4 and 5 and hopefully more. So I'm glad you're digging it.
When it comes to, I guess, sort of the archetype of, I guess, the honorable uh, thief or criminal, what do you think it is that has made that an appealing archetype across different stories over the years?
I think we live in a world without justice, and so I think that's what a lot of our comic stories are is a wish fulfillment about justice in the world. And this is not a superhero universe. Like Dead Eyes is not Deadpool. If he gets hit by a car, he gets hit by a car. If he falls off a building, he's dead. But those are not the things that happen in Dead Eyes stories, at least to him. And so I think as we live in a world where, people are needing to do GoFundMe's for medication or accidents, and watching how there's this insane disparity between, our oligarchs and the folks who are actually rowing the boat in this country. I think that's where the popularity of a character like Deadeyes, it's not a thing you really have to explain. It's just a thing that people will gravitate to or they won't.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with creator owned stories like this, one of my favorite things as I've I guess sort of gotten older over the years is that I've gone from a place with comics of following specific characters from the big two publishers to being like, oh, I really like this writer's work. I'm gonna look at these other books and stories that they've created outside of just, these big publisher universes.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that you know, creator-owned comics don't have Batman, they don't have Spider-Man, they don't maybe have the characters that you were growing up with, but we're always grateful for anyone that would, I always treated it like I was playing the main stage at a festival, at Lollapalooza, and then just sort of said, "See me in the side tent later." I never treated the my creator on like it was in a side tent. It's always every comic is the marquee comic, but you know that was where having an audience is helpful. I definitely have felt the wind at my back on falling in love on the path to hell because I'm coming off of X-Men and I was very privileged to be able to do it. I mean, we did a lot of other things right, I hope, to earn an audience, but it didn't hurt that, I was someone that was entrusted by Marvel to help land that plane with a lot of other talented folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about what you said too, as far as, not treating a story like it's on the side stage, something else that I've just kind of like evolved in the way that I look at different stories and even TV shows and things like that. Like it's really easy to, if people don't enjoy something nowadays, like they just hop online and just like drag it or whatever. But I look at everything where it's like, even if I read something that I'm not particularly into, every story could be someone else's favorite story. So like I
Yeah.
don't have to be the audience for everything.
Well, it's an important distinction. I always felt like we used to have far and away easy, ran away with it, the best job in the world. And the internet did change that a little bit. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm not going to sit around and get upset about, like a comic book that isn't necessarily intended for me. Life is too short. Even if it's something that has a familiar title, there's a lot of wonderful comic books out there, and people are always trying new things. And, if you go back and read the letters column, for some of the classic stories, you'll see how it really hasn't changed. The old Marvel folks really did feel like, that they were getting sort of a similar thing, but they were getting it once daily in the mail if they wanted to go look. We advised everyone, and I think most folks have taken this as every once in a while, someone will say to me like, "Oh, I love this story. I wasn't sure why that other person was mad at it." And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about. Like I don't know I didn't see the stuff." The worst place for a creative brain to be or for a storyteller to get feedback is from online. And think this is true of everyone, whether you're someone who um, is privileged enough to be able to do big two comics for popular characters, or whether you're someone that is bringing something to the world that you love that's creator owned. um, you know, Leave that to your fans. I think the people that might be yelling about things online, I don't assess that they're our readers. I think I would more likely assess that they are someone who saw something, a clip, a picture in a tweet, or a picture in on a blog post, and then away you go. At least that was to um, you know, our eyes. Whether how much of that is true, I'm not 100% sure, but online is a bad place to be for brains. You should really trust your own instincts and trust your own magnetic north as a compass.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest distinctions that I've ever noticed in discourse is when you like go from the things that people say online to the things that people actually say when they're in person at a convention. And like I always think of this panel that I was at a few years ago at C2E2 where CB Cebulski and Ryan Stegman were talking about um, the most recent like milestone anniversary for Spider-Man, and I think it was 70, no, 60
Mm.
years, something like that. And anyways, this guy comes up to the microphone and he's just kind of like hyperventilating and going on about the Peter Parker and Mary Jane marriage and how the greatest responsibility that a man can have is to be married and have a family and all this other stuff. And there's just this group of kids behind me and they're just like, "Oh God, another one of these guys." And I'm just like, "Oh, there's literally a segment for every different kind of Spider-Man story in this, and no one is like being outwardly vehement like they would be online, but they're just kind of like,
Sure.
oh, I've heard this argument too many times."
Yeah, there's again, the promise of the internet was that you'd be connected with everyone, and obviously the where we ended up was that's a very bad thing. I don't think Hunter S. Thompson or David Bowie or Alan Moore or any of the greats in any particular field are going to care about criticism. I'll be totally honest with you. Like, I know my X-Men run was those collaborations were extremely successful. We got paid our royalties or incentives that said that they were successful. I stood in a Hellfire gala that only existed because our artists sort of conjured it and then the cosplayers conjured it. And, our sales were very robust on a new story. And so I never feel the need to defend any of the work, past, present, or future. I've always just made the work. I thought I was going to be fired from Deadpool many times and wrote it like I was going to be fired, like kind of daring anyone to fire me, is a great place to be creatively. Um, Hitler's in issue 26. It makes a lot of sense why he's there, but like, it's a challenge. Like, go ahead. If it's bad, fire me.
Yeah. That just kind of reminds me also of Chip Zdarsky's run on Howard the Duck, where that
Yeah.
series also kind of had that kind of vibe to it, where you just kind of felt like he was daring the series to continue with each issue.
Yeah, I think, that's the mistake I think that folks will make is that they have arrived at Marvel or DC for a big swing of the bat, and then you start to play it safe. You're like, that's exactly the time where you want to swing so hard that you let go of the bat and almost kill someone.
Yeah.
It's a not a joke bit of advice. I think you want to do something indelible.
Yeah. And with that, one of my favorite premises in any comic right now is the premise of falling in love on the path to hell.
Oh,
Um,
good. I'm
the
glad. I'm
first
glad
issue
you're
of that.
enjoying it.
Yeah, the first issue, I was just kind of like, I was pulled in by the title because I'm like, this is an interesting title to begin with, but then the cover art is great. Um,
Gary Brown is a genius. Like, I really do think that he's a genius. His composition, his storytelling, his draftsmanship. He does so many things well that, like, I feel very privileged to be able to tell him a story that he then tells to all of you. Is a real treat. And there's nothing that I've thrown at him that he hasn't made look either beautiful or terrible. And I'm very grateful to have him along. So yeah, when I saw that first cover, that I knew exactly right at that moment, not just that we were going to hit it, but I also knew the title because we were tinkering around with a couple of things. I don't even remember what they were, but I said, "Oh, that cover is to a comic book called Falling in Love on the Path to Hell."
yeah, I mean, it's a perfect genre fusion too.
Thanks, bud.
It's probably surprising just based on the shirt that I'm wearing that I would enjoy a Western samurai fusion, but
I
um,
know my audience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just the whole idea of a Western gunslinger and a woman samurai dying and finding themselves together in purgatory is just that alone is the hook.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it. Look, I've been marinating, on things like that for a long time. COVID changed a lot of my thinking of what we experienced during the pandemic, and I just decided to try and make a comic with Gary that would be only things that I love, but then also only touched by people that I love or people that whose work I love, and to try and see where that took us. And it's been a really worthwhile experiment. We have a lot of folks at Image and Lunar, our distributor, and then all of our retail partners who have made us a big success. And then, when you love something, you can afford to look like a fool. Like I got to hang out with Frank Miller at Dallas and hand him a copy of the comic book and just say, Mr. Miller, thank you so much for your Ronin and for your covers to Lone Wolf and Cub, which led me to pick up that comic, which became my favorite comic ever. And then he said, "Oh my gosh, this looks so beautiful." And then, I said, "Well, it's an open invite if we could ever get you to accommodate a cover request from us." And then, when you name something you love, other interesting things can happen. Those sparks can lead to things. And, he was our guest cover last in this current month in October. And, I'll never get over that. Like I'll literally never get over that, he thought that we were doing something cool and wanted to share his talent with us. And we have a lot more of those coming up. So look, I'm glad we're hitting for you. And I hope someday if you're digging the book that, there's an omnibus on your shelf. I've done several omnibuses over the years, but nothing that I ever co-owned and co-created. And that's the hope here is that we're going to have volumes 3, 4, 5, 6 that lead to bigger things. So cross your fingers.
Yeah, and I was just hearing that that excites me to the point that I can picture that being something that would be like a beautiful volume on a shelf, and then you've got all that extra material in the back.
Oh, and there's so much cool stuff. The Gary's process. My designer Elliot Gray is a super talented UI designer from Bungie, and so he's working on Marathon right now. But at night he does this for us, and he probably made at least 10 different logos that we could have used that were probably just as good, but we just settled on the one that we fell in love with. And so we have that to show our color process. I don't particularly think that my scripts are that interesting because there's never a comic book script. I'll write a script for an artist, they'll go away and draw it, and then I'll come back and do what we call a letters polish pass. So it's hard, I oftentimes am giving people both scripts when they ask if can they read a script to a comic for some reason to go, I don't know what you're looking for. If it's the what I was talking about for the artist, it's here. If it was the lettering, here's how we did it there. And yeah, I'm a process junkie, so I do think that we're going to have a larger pool of stuff. But look, I'm also really hoping to get this comic to issue 50. There's enough juice there that we'll be able to do it. And the wind is at our back now. The retailers like us and trust us, and I know the fans do. I have a letters column, so if you haven't written us a letter yet, I hope you and your listeners will consider using the email in the back of the book to write us some fun fan letters. We're printing a lot.
Yeah, it's also just a book that from the first issue, all of the layouts, they just felt really cinematic to me. So it's something that like in my head I can just kind of see it um
Yeah,
playing out, which
Gary's a
also, yeah.
Kubrick guy too. He that's like his DNA is very proper comic book DNA. Like he was learning from the old man at the school when he was there.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's really easy to take for granted sometimes as a comic fan, like how difficult it can be to achieve a really good flow between every panel and every page to where it does kind of feel like it has that kind of cinematic feel to it and you kind of lose yourself in the art and you're not just sort of flipping through, you know?
Yeah. I try to get out of the way of every artist and just become invisible. I think there are some things that I know what I do really well, and but I always felt like I'm like the distillate, from a still in a distillery, and the artists are the wood that will give all of the comic book their flavor. So I would write for Gary one way and write for Phil Noto another, and probably write for Pepe Larraz in a third way. I want to be utterly transparent and utterly hittable. I want them to hit all the home runs and then make you all fall in love with them. And I think that's been a big part of my longevity, is being able to sort of figure out what an artist wants to do, or ask them what they want to do, or when they don't know what they want to do, find something that they want to do. And it's often very different from, artist to artist.
With your photo book, Timing and Luck, that's coming out December 10th. How did that come about?
Honestly, it's another thing like falling in love on the path to hell that was a COVID project. When the world stopped turning, I we weren't leaving the house much. Um, I wasn't going to Comic Cons anymore. I wasn't getting on planes and going to Marvel retreats. And those were a lot of places where I would walk around with my camera, shoot some pictures. I'd go back and hopefully, I tried to have good practices and put them in a Dropbox or back up the hard drive. Really, when COVID hit, I started assessing what I had and how much there was that might be worth sharing. But I was also finding like huge gaps. I had a laptop computer that was on its last legs at that point, and realized that like I had time machined that, but never put it up to the cloud. So I was in danger of losing not just months, but really years of photos through bad practices. And so now I have a good workflow for all of that. But just in assessing what I had, I sort of found things that I wanted to share. I found photos that I wanted to share. And I also, I'm always sort of trying to make a story out of what life is throwing at me. And sometimes that works and becomes comics, and sometimes it doesn't work and it just becomes frustration. But the book came together, and it was pretty clear each one of these photos had a story or was telling a story, and then collectively it was my story. So I didn't really set out to make a pictorial autobiography, but I do believe that would probably be the best way to explain what it is you're getting. It's about 20 years of my existence in LA, um, in comics in Hollywood, in writers' rooms, and then, hoofing it around the streets in cities around the world that I was lucky enough to be invited to. Um, I think the pictures get better, and therefore the book gets better as it goes. I think it's charming. It has somewhat humble beginnings in terms of both my story, but then also the cameras. Like some of those early ones are almost early phone cam pics, and then I graduated to a Fuji X100, which ironically now is a hip camera all of a sudden. The Instagram and TikTok crowd has settled on that as being a camera that is collectible, which is hilarious. I had bought it 15 years ago when my son was born, because I could tell exactly how old he was based on what shitty generation iPhone photo I was looking at. Um, cameras do also run in my family. My father used one in Vietnam, and we still have that camera. My son, that was my first film camera, and my son's first film camera. And my sister was a very big photographer. She was George Washington University's first official photographer. But I will say this to anyone out there. I certainly hope that you like my comics collaborations. If you don't, I'm almost assuredly have photographed some of your favorite comics creators in various states of either pitching comics, making comics, or enjoying the fruits of their labor in the comic book industry while traveling, either in pubs or on streets around the world. Um, it it's an artifact, right? It's also a way of time traveling. It's a pretty reliable way of being bamfed back 10 years into my first Marvel retreat and being a fly on the wall again.
What was the, I guess, sort of most fun part of putting that together? And, what were, I guess, maybe the most fun things to revisit as you were pulling the photos for it?
You know, honestly, the friends that I made that we were making something together. There were um, not as many photos as you might think from the Marvel from inside the Marvel retreats because it is sort of a safer, sacred space, and sometimes you were not really even allowed to share who was in the room at that point. My favorites are all the stuff of outside of that room, out in the streets in New York. Just as an example, there's a moment where Al Ewing and Donny Cates figured out that they were going to switch books. And that really is the moment where they were going to switch books. And there's another moment that involves Al, where I literally photographed the conversation that we were all having about post Planet Size X-Men. What would Mars slash Arakko be? And Al said, well, of course, maybe, we need and just immediately swords started sort of percolating inside of him. And with little help from the rest of us, he sort of figured out like there's a very fertile place to tell stories. And the hugely additive thing that we're always looking for is a place in the universe where you don't need to worry about what Spider-Man might be doing or what Spider-Man might want from you. That was the Frank Miller Daredevil too, right? He picked Daredevil, a book that was only selling 6 issues a year because it was only selling 6 issues a year, and nobody was going to ask him to tie into stuff to bug him. He didn't take Amazing Spider-Man, which would later tie into Secret Wars. He hung up his hat in a quiet corner, and that was the great thing about Arakko at that time. Al became the head chef, and the rest of us would go with our hats in our hands to go, could this be on Arakko? So you were always looking for those opportunities where you can really dig your teeth in and not feel like you were going to hit speed bumps that would take you into other places.
Yeah, I mean, just to that point about, all of um, the details for Arakko. One of the other things that I really liked about that period of X-Men was that between the adjectiveless book that you were on and then X-Men Red and Immortal X-Men, they all felt like they were the X-Men book, but at the same time, they felt like they were their own thing.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, that's a high compliment. We all uh, want to write our book as though we're producing the only book on stands. And I think that goes back to what I was saying about hopefully not playing it safe and doing something indelible and doing something that might get your editor in trouble and then you in trouble. There's some things coming up in West Coast Avengers that I hope raise eyebrows, and um, we'll see. I think if you're doing that, you have a real chance to succeed, not just in terms of finances, but also in terms of spiritual winning and whether or not you're going to become something that someone says, "Oh, you have to read this." For me too, that was the Savage Avengers. I just tried to write that like I was going to be fired for writing it. I was never quite fired enough. Excuse me.
And with any of the projects that you're working on, Is there any chance that any of those will have a kaiju show up at any point?
It's funny. Obviously, the like another COVID project I had was that silly kaiju book, but like it has a real beating heart in that, and yes, there's always monsters in the dark room, so we have another volume of the dark room. I have a couple of film adaptations of a couple of these comics that might come back around. So I've been very busy on Analog and Dead Eyes and Dark Room, and obviously falling in love is a huge priority. I really just have the one Marvel book right now, and that's great because so much of the rest of my slate, my dance card is very, very full. But yes, there is explicitly another angry kaiju in my life that you'll hear about, I think, in the spring, that I'm working on, that I'm really excited about.
Yeah. No, I'm excited for that too. I really enjoyed the Giant Kokju, so that
The name King
yeah.
Dong wouldn't clear, and for anyone that doesn't know, it was basically, as a kid, I said, "Where does Godzilla go to the bathroom?" And I think my father said, "Well, wherever Godzilla wants." And I said, "Oh, okay." But then that just got me thinking, as you get older, you're like, it's not a dumb question. And like, not only that, who is he fucking? And one thing led to another, and there was real joy to be had in sort of the low hanging fruit of an anatomically correct monster attack, set against family drama, and with a very sort of retro future robot, like a '70s disco robot. That Scott Koblish is a really talented guy. He can do it all, and he crushed that. So, I actually managed to turn that like 5 issue mini into a 3 issue mini just by going, nope, we're just going to cut it down to the bone, make it as funny as possible, make it as sad as possible, make it as gross as possible. And we ran it on Substack first, and then we printed it in Image, and I think it's hilarious.
Yeah.
I always know that I could be friends with folks that laughed at that. It comes from a very pure place, which is also another good lesson for almost all of us. Like, have purity of intent. Like, there were a lot of things we talk about this, those of us that write a little comedy, how far you will go to make a friend laugh. And I've made a book about a giant monster with a dick that used a bus like a flashlight. It was as far as I could think to go.
Yeah, no, I mean that question that served as the premise for the book is, something that I just always wondered as a kid when I would see like
Yeah,
characters that were supposed to be stuck in their costumes, like the rhino or the scorpion. Like, what are they doing? They gotta poop.
yeah, of course. It's a totally those questions only become more valid as you age. It's easier to accept. And it, speaking of questions, as a kid, like, to me, the silliest part of the Superman story was that his father was a scientist that nobody listened to about climate change. And now, of course, we're in a world where that's literally the most believable part of a story that we've all accepted for almost a century now. He's almost public domain. Will he become public domain, or will the climate collapse before then? Stay tuned.
And with that, I've had you for about an hour now. I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know you're super busy. But is there anything else that you want to put out there?
Well, I hope the trade, the soft cover of Falling in Love on the Path to Hell is out in January. So if you've been sleeping on that book, and again, the elevator pitch is just a samurai and a gunslinger meet in purgatory and begin their epic romance. It's a 9.99 trade. So that was, if you were reading the singles, that would be roughly issues 1 and 2. We found a way to print early and print overseas, and bring a lot of value to that book. If you're loving it and you're trying to share that love with someone, please tell them that they can pick up that book on January 8th, 2025 for $9.99 and get caught up. We'll have issues 6 and 7 out by then, but I do think we're going to overprint them. So you could pick up the trade, decide you love it, want 5, 6, and 7, and they should be available. They should be on stands. But we're going to keep cooking. We're going all the way. We're going to do about 8 or 9 issues a year, maybe as many as 10 if I get the right fill-ins that I'm looking for a couple of years. And then obviously my photo book is out late November, early December, and that's also super cheap for what it is. It's a couple 100 pages of photos and story about the last 20 years of comic books in Hollywood, and that's only $20. And then West Coast Avengers debuts in November, I think Thanksgiving week. And there's a really big story there. All of my Avengers team books and really my Marvel team books always seem to star a big villain in a new way. Cool Goth was a cannibal wizard that we had in Savage Avengers, and I don't want to reveal who it is in West Coast quite yet. The last scene is really great, but Danny Kim, who's drawing West Coast, is just incredible. I saw him this past weekend at a Lightbox Expo in Pasadena. He's going to be your new favorite artist if you're not already his great fan. He was doing Ghost Rider with Ben Percy, and he's with Master Kim Jung-ji's company, Super Annie, and super talented. Like you're gonna love the book. It's a lot of fun. So again, for many years from Deadpool onward, I've been very privileged to be able to collaborate at Marvel, and I couldn't be happier that is continuing to be true.
And thanks so much for taking the time to chat today, Gerry.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me, Roger.
Run, you, run, you, run.